Welcome to the Media Roundtable Industry Edition 2. This is a fun episode. We have not a little bit to talk about. 2025, we're looking back on a slow year, a quiet year, a year that not much happened in podcasting or in America or in the world, really. But we're going to try to see if there's anything worth mentioning. We have some of the greatest minds in the industry that we call podcasting still today. I think we still call it podcasting. A lot has changed. And we're going to break it down. We're going to talk about what do we feel were the most interesting stories of the year. What are the implications of them? What does it mean for the future? And the brains that we have here, we have some fun people. We have some very smart people here with us to unpack it. I will exclude myself from the list aforementioned, but I am your host, Dan Granger. I'm the CEO of Oxford Road. But let me tell you about the smart people that we have. We have James Cridland here looking back with us, editor of Pod News and Podcast Business Journal, among other things. We have Kyle Jelinek. Welcome, Kyle, VP of Client Services here at Oxford Road. We have Neil Lucy, a familiar voice to many of you, or face if you like the YouTube thing. He is EVP of Strategy and Product at Oxford Road. And we have Hernan Lopez back with us, founder of Owl & Co., and he's also founded other things in this industry, but those other things may or may not come up in the course of this discussion. Welcome, everybody. So grateful to have you as we try to unpack whatever you want to say about this year. Why don't I just kick off the first topic that may or may not be one of the more defining stories of the last 12 months. And that is video. Video has, at least from where I sit, had such a profound impact that, like, even doing the intro to this show is getting really confusing, because for the last few years, I do this whole preamble about this is in service of the chief audio officer. And it's really the chief audio officer that is like the kingpin stakeholder in this industry, because they focus on this audio channel with podcasts at the center of it. But now, every time I say the word audio, I feel like I may or may not even be talking about podcasting anymore because of this whole video thing. It's really changed the landscape, and the implications are profound. And so, look, a lot has happened. Some of the headlines are, we came into the year with YouTube announcing 1 billion monthly active podcast viewers. We talked a lot about that on this show. How do they count it? How do they know? But there's no question that it's been profound in its impact. We've seen Spotify make real effort to promote their video capabilities. And we talked a lot about that for the first half of the year. And then very recently, all of a sudden, this whole Netflix word has been coming into the picture. And the question is anybody going to challenge Spotify's dominance in terms of consumption when it comes to video? And that's part of the story. The other part of the story really isn't the war for share of eyes, but really what it's revealed about some of the measurement gaps in how we count things in this industry. So, when you talk about 1 billion active monthly users, and everybody having their own charts, go to the Apple charts, go to the YouTube charts, which they now have, go to the Spotify charts. How are they calculating these things? And what happens when shows like The Breakfast Club or Jay Shetty or The Ringer start showing up in places like Netflix? And advertisers who are funding this whole thing have to figure out, how do you count what an impression actually is, with some counting plays and some counting downloads. And effectively, when you look at the big three distribution platforms, Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, it's like we're comparing touchdowns, home runs, and goals. And so let me pause there, and let me just ask for some feedback from the group. I'm gonna start with Kyle, but I'd love everybody to pile in on this one. Has this been the story of the year, the kind of the emergence and ascendance of video into the channel? and how much of it is hype, and how important is it in the work that we do here?
Oh, it's very important. I mean, you nailed it with like downloads are dead. And what did we ever figure out what a download actually was? I don't think we ever came to that conclusion. But um, if I've seen clients right now going into the space hesitant because they can't measure it properly, but there are systems, there are ways to go around this. We've done that. Um, and I've seen people sit on the sidelines because they can't accurately measure the YouTube component or the video component. And I think that's misguided. I think it's changing the way that we're buying. It's changing the way that we're measuring, obviously, and it's also changing some of the things that we've asked for. It used to be host read ads are that was everything that we could ever ask for. Now it's we need to have video component. We need to have the host actually on video talking about it. Um, and then can we cut these things up and can we retarget them? Can we use them in social media? It's opening up a lot of new opportunities for everybody.
I think both listening and watching are converging. I thought it was very interesting in the way both YouTube and Spotify talk about their overall consumption metrics. YouTube talks about watch time, not just for podcasts, but for everything. And that includes some listen time. When you're listening to a podcast on background, YouTube will count that as watch time. Equally, on last week when Spotify published the Spotify Wrap, Daniel Ek said that there were 11 trillion minutes of listening, but that surely included some watch time. So the fact that even the bigger platforms are conflating listen and watch time tells us that there is a need for the industry to come together on a time-based metric of what success looks like next year. I think that's going to be that was, if anything, the big unanswered question of 25 and might be the biggest to do for 2026.
Hernan, given your background working on, running a monster network and working with creators and working with shows, I mean, we talk a lot about the impact on the advertisers and, how this makes it hard to judge, like, what's a CPM and, what is the value that I got versus what I paid for. But how does it impact creators? How does it impact the other side of the ecosystem from the supply standpoint when we have this confusion?
I think that creators, we talked about this throughout the year. Yes, it was true that video got a lot of press, a lot of attention, but video is not necessary for every podcast. It's not the best strategy for every podcast. I think we're going to talk today about the ROI of producing video and all the things that you lose when you're interviewing video. You cannot edit as quickly. You cannot you cannot tighten an episode as effectively as you can with audio only. So I think each podcaster, each creator needs to decide what is the best avenue for them. And for many of them, video is not necessary beyond a promotional tool. I do think that every podcaster should have a video promotional strategy as a minimum.
Well, we can save some of the discussion about the production implications, but just in terms of the simple measurement of the channel, right? If you're a host and you're negotiating what your minimum guarantee is going to be, or you're trying to figure out how to monetize your audience, like, are they thinking about the fact that a download is not a view? Is that part of the calculus? How is that impacting people when they think about the economics of the business from the content side?
I think the creators need to add their reach and their metric of listening and watching across as many platforms as they can. And to the extent, and then the reach that matters is really the reach that is advertising supported. There are vanity metrics, and we all know that views are very well known as one of the most inflated vanity metrics, and they're metrics that are important to advertisers. And what's most important to advertisers is how many people actually listen, watch your spot, and how many engage with it in a way that actually creates a connection and a propensity for the consumer to understand the message so many other variables come into play, the skippability of it and the attention and the environment and how the quality of the host read. So I don't think that there's one metric that really can capture all of the variables in it, which is why agencies that specialize like you guys have a great role in steering advertisers to where the results are going to be strongest.
Well, I want to get some more voices on this, but just still staying with you. One of the things I wonder a lot is how many advertisers that are like the brands buying through holding companies are completely buying a bill of goods and have no idea, because they're buying vanity metrics or intent metrics or download metrics alone without the ability to filter that through a lens like performance, where you can it kind of normalizes everything for you, right? But if you're only buying based on the exposure, and that exposure is so arbitrary, like to what extent are people just getting taken buying off of false metrics because we really have no standards or clarity or quality control as an industry?
I don't want to make very broad generalizations, but I think that every agency probably has to have a collection of different metrics that are appropriate for their clients. In digital advertising writ large, forget about podcasts. There are so many variables that go into advertising effectiveness, and there are agencies that do the work and agencies that do less work. So I think I don't want to overgeneralize, but I do think, as obviously the reason why I'm on this podcast is I know that the work that you guys do that is very specific to podcasts is something that every agency, every client needs to be paying attention to.
Well, and James, I know that you've been saying we should get away from just trying to make podcasts about audio and really just push it all through video platforms for a long time. So maybe you want to elaborate. This has been a good year for you in that regard. Yeah. Is that right? Did I get that right?
I'm not quite sure that I've been saying that. Look, I think what we've seen over the last year is we've seen real confusions about definitions. Definitions from the platforms on what consumption actually is. So YouTube apparently counts 30-second views as a play, except YouTube have never said what a play actually is. And it's my understanding that it actually differs depending on whether you're a smaller show or a bigger show. Spotify is counting the instant plays that you see as you're scrolling through the Spotify app and not actually hit the play button at all. And of course, Apple itself uses consumption data and stuff like that, but the wider podcast ecosystem using OpenRSS uses downloads. There's so many different definitions there. There's also a definition in terms of all of the stats that I see about YouTube being the biggest in terms of podcasting is all based on people, unique reach. It's not based on consumption. And consumption, Apple still wins. Not Spotify, but Apple still wins. So we have all of these weird definitions. And then just to add to that, we've got the definition in terms of ad budgets. When a podcast stops being a podcast and starts being a video show, I don't think anybody really has yet fixed that. What budget line does this ad come from? Who knows? So I think, ideally, we should be seeing more companies like Bumper, more companies like Pod Analyst, companies that are going into all of the individual platforms such as YouTube, Apple, Spotify, normalizing the data that you get out of that, making sure that it's all consumption-based information and signed-in based information so that we actually have real numbers that we can compare. And I think that would be a great start. But at the moment, we're looking at different numbers that mean different things, and we're all kind of flailing around in the dark a little bit.
I think the two things I would say is video is definitely the big story for 2025. It's been building for a few years. It's not. I think 2025 is the culmination of it to a degree because it'll still continue. The one thing I would say is, I think James mentioned it, that YouTube is, by some measures, the number one platform from consuming a podcast. However, the time spent with listening to a podcast on YouTube, it tends to switch to the audio platforms. And I think it's interesting to see new players come in, especially Netflix, trying to create their footprint in podcasting. And I wish them the best of luck, since YouTube still has about 64 or 65% share of, I think.
Do you mean Warner Brothers?
No. Well, yeah. That might not happen, Dan.
Wait, by the time this thing runs, it'll be.
It could be
Yeah,
Paramount.
right, exactly.
Paramount just made a bid for them today.
Right, and they're. I'm sure that story is going to evolve, but it is interesting to see. And I know we've had some debate, and we could spend another 90 minutes just talking about the Netflix piece, right? But I guess before we move on from this topic, I'd love a hot take from any of you on what you think the future of Netflix in this space is. Is this just another big platform that passing through and spending a half a year talking about it to abandon ship, or do you think they're going to be a factor going forward? Neil, since you've been on it, where would you vote?
I think they'll eventually abandon ship, is my prediction, because YouTube has such an advantage.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, they've tested this with Kill Tony. They're showing like one a month. They're not really fully invested into any particular show. They're not making it a source for discovery. And like so many times, I think they're gonna move on to the next big thing. Maybe it's Warner Brothers.
I'll take the other side. I don't think that they're in this to abandon it. So the first experiment will be the launch of the Spotify podcast, the 16 shows that they announced they're going to take co-exclusively, or I can't remember the word, but it's everybody except for YouTube will have access to the shows. And but that's the first slate. I know that they're actively talking to podcasters both on the licensing side as well as the original creation side. And they're not, it's first quarter when they're going to make the first rollout. And Netflix is famously a company that tries, tests, and learns, and then scales things that work for them. And I think that one of the reasons why they wanted to get into the podcast space is to cover some moments of the day that consumers were not thinking about Netflix. Consumers typically think about Netflix at night when they come back home and they want to have a movie or a television show to watch. Then over the last couple of years only really have experimented with live and sports, but those are tiny, really shares of the total viewership. And I think one of the reasons why they started with the Ringer podcast is that they want to see whether they can get people's, particularly sports viewers, to engage more with the platform starting earlier in the day. And if that works, I think they will scale. It is true that they're not thinking about becoming a platform to replace Spotify or let alone YouTube. They're not thinking about becoming the place where people think of when they want to watch a podcast first.
I mean, I would say the evidence is very clear that Netflix is looking at this as a very short-term experiment, because they're only signing people up for a year.
For a year.
And so, I mean, that's certainly the information that I end up seeing. And they've just bought Warner Brothers. They will be so distracted by building that $28 billion business into Netflix anyway. I can't see them being particularly excited about pulling some cheap TV shows into their into their service.
They may have bought Warner Brothers. It looks like Paramount just outbid them, based on reports earlier today.
We won't know.
Yeah, we're TBD. It's going to be a long week.
Yeah.
phone was blowing up all day with the two offers, and I think we won't know for a while. But even the earliest that they still could close is early 2027, so they still have that whole year before they can activate.
All right, Neil, you wanted to get in there.
I did want to say I hadn't really considered Hernan's point of day parting. So television or Netflix, it's available to you 24 hours a day. The majority of their viewership would be at prime time in the evening, and finding viewers in a different day part is a smart strategy for them. And doing so via podcast is interesting.
Unfortunately for you, our call sheet bet is closed now, Neil, and you took the other side of the bet.
I took it.
I actually threw in with Hernan.
$100.
I went long on Netflix here.
I'm not changing my bet.
I think at the end of the day, like, wait till they find out how cheap it is to make shows, and they have these big, beautiful shows. You know, I love The Diplomat, I love Ozark, but you think about how much it costs to support that hour, and when they see how efficient this is to expand engagement, I don't know. I'm not saying I think it's going to be YouTube or Spotify necessarily, but I could see it being a premium destination where you have fewer choices. But some of the marquees, it's worth it for them to wall it off if it is for anybody. That's where my bet is. But we'll see. We'll see in a year who makes money on this conversation. We got to move on. Piece of data I came across is that there are actually countries other than the United States in the world, and that some of the people in those other countries actually consume podcasts, and that may actually be at a bit of an inflection point. So, Hernan, do you want to chime in here?
So I think you and I spoke when I published the Global Podcast Economy Report that measured the total size of the global economy at $7.3 billion. The US was about 2/3 of that. And if you look at almost any other scaled large advertising business from YouTube to Facebook, the US is rarely more than 45% of the world. In reality, compared to world GDP, is much less. But the US has traditionally had higher advertising density than the rest of the world. So that would indicate that the rest of the world has more upside than the US. And I thought that was going to be the theme of next year, but I'm going to reserve my prediction for the next half of the episode. I do think that we still have a significant opportunity throughout the globe, but I don't think that necessarily means that the rest of the world will, or any particular market outside of the US that's large, will grow faster than the US.
I don't know about that. I think that the UK probably will grow faster, if only because I think when you start quite small, then it's quite easy to grow quite fast in terms of that. But certainly, I mean, it's interesting seeing the Apple Podcasts of the Year this year being The Rest Is History, a show from the UK. Goalhanger are having an incredible year. And I think that they're going to do very well there. The Podcast Hall of Fame gets announced in the next few days. And I know of at least 2 inductees this year, which, shock horror, aren't from North America. So all of a sudden, I think that there is quite a lot of interest going on of podcasting outside of North America. And I think also it's easier to sell now. The deals are now done where if you are NPR, you are earning money in Australia from whoever it is who sells the NPR shows here, or Wondery, or whoever it might end up being. All of those representation deals are done, which is very handy. It certainly wasn't the case 3-4 years ago. So I think there are more upsides now of North American companies really pushing into particularly English-speaking countries, across the world with their content, because all of a sudden they can actually monetize them rather better than they've ever been able to do in the past.
I was on a call with a network last week that, in fact, like to expand on what you're talking about, James, using AI to transcreate the content into the native tongue, in the host voice and inflection, and they're looking to scale this thing into markets where they currently haven't had any access into. So I think that, in addition to everything you've said, is it's it's set for massive growth.
Well, and Kyle, you've been pretty close to being active in that space, right? I mean, how much have you seen it change in the last 12 months on the buy side?
On the buying side, measurement has been the challenge, and oftentimes, I remember our first buy that we did with a very large network in the UK. They were like, "We have full measurement capabilities." And we're like, "Fantastic!" And it was how many impressions they delivered.
Opportunities for exposure, maybe?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's been an educational process to all of these different networks. Like, here's what we're looking for: getting them set up with the pixel tracking, getting them set up with at least the buy signals that we require to measure the performance. And I was on a call 2 weeks ago with a content producer in Sweden, and he was like, "I really want to do this. I just don't know how. I really want to know the efficacy of my campaign because I don't know anything other than people just keep buying it." And so there is an appetite for it, but just the markets are still, I mean, I think they're 5-10 years behind where the US was as far as tracking. But they're all open to it.
If you're an advertiser, though, going into some of these markets, there's a lot less competition for ad space, and so you still have advertisers that are diving into international, that are learning, as we've had with our clients, really have a big advantage, and an advantage of being first in and kind of owning real estate in the international markets.
To be clear, I am bullish on worldwide and I'm bullish in the US. I didn't mean to say that the local any local market will not grow. What I do think is that the US still has a lot of room for growth, even despite its large size. And one of the variables that actually plays into it, Dan, I know you are interested in this angle, is the revival of the host read ad. How we've got not host read, but rather baked in, how baked in ads have made a comeback in the last year, partially because of video and partially because it is the only format that guarantees that the creator will get 100% of the revenue without any of it going through to the platforms, and actually guarantees that the ad will be seen throughout any platform. When I was at Wondery, we had made a big push to move away from baked in because we felt that that dynamic insertion was the most scalable way to optimize inventory. But I was actually very curious to see that this year baked in made a comeback, and that would mean that the creators, especially the US based ones, will dedicate more of the inventory towards baked in, which travels worldwide.
Well, it's welcome from where we sit. And I mean, I think the pro tip is for the advertisers is, if you can actually bet on or invest in a channel that is 5 years behind what podcasts is today, like, get ahead. And it's amazing how many US companies that are in the channel have capabilities to buy internationally and don't, which is a bit of a crime. I know that there's even a conference that our team has been going to. I don't know who programs this thing, but it's Podcast Show London has actually been pretty well received. And every time people go, they keep saying, "Oh, it's the best event in our industry." But I don't know, James, have you ever been to that one?
Well, I'm an advisor, so clearly I couldn't say anything. But I mean, I would definitely recommend. I mean, clearly go to Podcast Movement. That's a really important thing. But also, Podcast Show London is a great event. It's 2 days. It's very, very different. You'll see a load of very, very different people, very different companies. There's an international stage, which means a stage that isn't just full of Americans. It's full of other people too. And I would heartily recommend that. That's in May in London, which is a lovely time to go. And if you're
James, if I wanted to go, but I really needed some sort of financial incentive, what could you give me?
Well, if you were to sign up to the Pod News newsletter, it's free. Then you can get 10% off passes to the Podcast Show London, which just to level your expectations is about $5. So you'll be able to buy me a half of a pint of warm beer with that.
It's not nothing. Okay. All right, let's move on. Neil, you've got some other exciting information for us.
Yeah,
about radio, I believe.
Let's talk about our radio and radio's reckoning and potential reinvention in 2025. So radio is still in a precarious position. Reach, from what I see, typically declines about 1 percentage point a year in the U.S., and that's been pretty consistent. But it is showing signs of life through programmatic and streaming partnerships. The big news was at the beginning of the year when Nielsen changed its methodology from 5 minutes to be counted as a listener to now 3 minutes to be a listener. That raised the ratings. The radio industry celebrated that news and claimed more listenership, but it really was just a change in how...
It's effectively a shell game, is it not?
Yeah. It was a change in how things are measured, not how people are actually listening, right? But radio still has a local trust advantage. And I think, interestingly, there are some radio stations that are refinding their local advantage. That was some of the news that we covered this year. It was kind of surprising that radio, like, has always been almost a purely kind of local medium for the most part, hasn't really taken advantage of that local aspect. And there are now stations that are doing that more and more. The other things to be notable are all the partnerships that occurred. So Odyssey and iHeart created a partnership where they're sharing their content across their apps. iHeart joined up with other publishers to make their inventory available on the Amazon DSP. And that will unlock broadcast to programmatic in the future. So that's a big deal. In the meantime, radio is still capturing the majority of listenership in cars. However, while the Radio in Every Vehicle Act sort of languishes in Congress, Tesla has taken the step of removing FM radio now from their cars. So, that's an interesting development that they don't see that there's a demand for FM radio in their cars. They've already taken AM radio out of their cars. So we'll see how that plays out over time.
Yeah, Tesla's move is really interesting. It's only the very, very cheapest car that doesn't have FM inside it. And, others are saying that FM is so important to drivers that actually that might be the thing that actually gets them to spend a couple of extra $1,000 just to get the FM radio in there. I mean, there's an awful lot of really good data around radio consumption, particularly in the US. So if you look at all of the audio, all of the ad-supported audio that we listen to, podcasts is 20% of the ad-supported audio that we listen to on a typical weekly basis. Radio, AM, FM radio, 64%, 3 times as large. So radio is still very, very large. The only issue really is that the age of the typical radio listener is, it's nowhere near as young as podcasting is.
It's like 2x, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think, yes, the median age of podcast audiences is going up. The latest figures that I see says that the median age is 39. So it's getting up there, but radio is still in the 60s, if not older. So, and that's not to say that you shouldn't be advertising to people who are 50 and older, but clearly there is a difference there. So I think certainly radio is still a massively important place. As Neil said, 84% of the audio that you listen to in a car is the radio. So it's still a massively important place. But I'm just, I think once you dive into the numbers and you actually see some of the people who are listening to the radio, then there is a question of, are these the number one audiences that you want to advertise to? And that's a bit of a concern for the long-term future of what radio will actually give you.
Did you guys see The Life of Chuck, the movie, the Stephen King novel they turned into a movie, put it out this year? Who's the guy that plays Loki? He plays Chuck. It's a great movie. It's about like the end of the world, and over time the internet goes down for everybody and it never goes back up, and then suddenly people are listening to the radio again and using different broadcast signals. I thought that's an interesting argument for why, and it certainly feels like end times. So I think there's going to be a place for it. It's interesting to keep a medium active that is a hedge against the future of cyber warfare, where we start to see real problems with the internet. But staying away from the apocalyptic, I don't think it matters that it's going away. I think we all know it's been going away, but its death has been greatly exaggerated for a long time. 60% of us on this panel worked in it as a career, and I think all feel some affection for it. But the reality is that it was America's companion, or that's what we called it here in the States for a long time, because it really did live up to the companion promise for so long. And it's going to potentially be decades before there isn't critical mass listening to it. So for anybody that's planning media around it, I would, as a marketer, the way I look at this is, look at it the same way you look at international. You may not be able to capitalize on that audience, but if you can, you absolutely should, because the value keeps getting better and better. And I continue to be pleasantly surprised by seeing our volume of media in radio being purchased increasing over time, even while the iceberg melts slowly, because there really is value there. So, I think it's fun to make fun of radio, but at the same time, it really is a good value, and it's not going to be gone tomorrow. It's not going to be gone next year, whatever they do in a Tesla. Like that's it's a thing. With that, I want to talk about the infinite dial, something else that goes on and on forever, like radio. Kyle, can you catch us up on what happened here?
Yeah, I feel I'm very proud of this. Actually, I feel like our little podcast baby is all grown up.
Yes.
It hit a critical mass this year, 73%, according to the Infinite Dial report from Edison. Americans 12 plus are tuning in. So that's 210 million people tuning into a podcast or have tuned into a podcast, 55% monthly reach, 40% every week, which is more than doubled since, long before we started, or after we started this thing over at Oxford. Since 2017, it's more than doubled. So we're seeing some major strides in podcasts. What I thought was really interesting, female audience is growing 16%. It's the largest spike that we've seen in over a decade. 18 to 34, we're talking about where are these people going? They're not on radio anymore. They're on podcasts. We're seeing 52%, which equals the consumption of television. The real sleeper hit, actually, what I was seeing too, was actually the old crowd. We saw a jump on 55 plus, 11% jump year over year. So they are transitioning. They're also listening to the radio, but they're tuning into podcasts for the first time. So we're seeing growth there. brand awareness is growing. We're seeing for the first time brand awareness spike higher than what we saw the growth on direct marketing. I don't love that necessarily as a direct marketer. It's just in my blood, but we're seeing these brands come in and start to use the space. But at the end of the day, this thing's not niche anymore. And so with the scale opportunities, there's obviously challenges, and competition's never been harder. I'm in the midst of 2026 planning for a number of advertisers, and we are in battles right now just because everybody wants to be on the shows that we've been on for years. So it's a fun time to be in the space, but also challenging.
Yeah, I would say that one thing I want to point out is you mentioned the weekly reach at 52% equaling TV at 52%. It's a little bit harder to scale that reach in podcasts and in television. So TV, even among the younger folks, will have a reach advantage for a while. And even, hearkening back to the last story, media consumption changes happen slower for the consumers than they do for marketers. Marketers tend to be ahead of media consumption changes and see things as dying or dead, and they're still around. It certainly is not niche anymore. I think one of the things that is interesting, and it goes back to our first story, the 55% monthly listening for Edison was a big jump from last year. And part of that was because they had to change how they're measuring listenership to include video as part of that. So they altered the question, and they've done that previously to make sure that they're capturing the broader podcast landscape, not just audio listening, but video consumption as well.
I think one of the things around the total reach figure is that it's not a consumption figure. And again, I think we should be focusing more on consumption than we are on reach. That reach figure is going to plateau because obviously, the amount of people who listen to a podcast isn't necessarily going to rocket upwards anymore. And I think we should be focusing on the 773 million figure. That's the amount of hours consumed listening to podcasts every single week in the US, 773 million. If we can double that number, we double the money that comes into our industry. That's the important number, 773 million. It comes from the Infinite Dial as well. And I think we should be focusing on that number from here on in, not on the 73% of Americans who've consumed a podcast. I've stood on a Lego brick in my bare feet once, and I'm not going to do it again because it hurt. So I would rather look at the amount of consumption. 773 million is an incredible number. And if we can increase that number, then we stand really well as an industry, whatever a podcast is, of course.
Well, and that's what I wonder. I mean, I think I started hearing this year that the up and to the right trajectories that we've gotten accustomed to is kind of over. We got spoiled for so long that every year it was like, look at these major growth numbers in terms of reach, right? And I think what you're saying, James, is that like we need to now get to different metrics that we're starting to focus on. But I do wonder how much of that is fueling the drive for video, because if you can count things that we might not have called podcasts before podcasts, and if you can, tap into these other distribution channels, is that the way that some folks can keep the party going to keep things moving at the trajectory it was, if you're going to count it that way? Do you think does anybody here think that could be a motivator?
I, for what it's worth, not only agree with James's view that we need to find a way to measure time spent, we need to do that consistently and regularly over time. It is amazing that Edison came up finally. I don't know that they have done their estimate before this year. James, have they? I think it's the first time they got the 773 million.
Yeah, I worked with Edison because I wanted to see what that figure was.
Right.
So I've seen the figures for the last 10 years, but this has been the only figure that they have released other than 10 years or so ago, I think. And so, of course, as you would imagine, it's rather a lot more than it was 10 years ago, yeah.
When I started Wondery, one of the first questions that I had for people who were measuring the industry was precisely this one: how much time do people spend in the aggregate? I heard nobody has tried or even attempted really to measure that with passive measurement, which would be the best, most scalable way of measuring month in and month out. I even tried to measure the total size of the market by downloads, and I then realized that it is a much harder challenge than people realize. But I do think that in order to fully compete with other kinds of media, and I should say, I'm actually talking to other people in order to see how this could be achieved. I do think that in order to fully compete for advertising dollars and for overall consumer dollars or licensing dollars, the industry needs to agree on one standard time spent based metric for podcasts as a whole. How much of it is video, how much of it is audio, and then from that, find out how much each podcast is listened to. Nielsen has done an amazing job with the gauge in highlighting the growth of streaming time spent versus linear broadcasting and linear cable. And I think the time is right for that to happen for the podcast industry. And that, I think, presupposes we agree on that definition of what a podcast is, which I think is another subject dear to everybody's heart over here.
Good luck.
Yeah, well, and so we're getting tight on time here. Unfortunately, this is a two-parter, so we're going to get into some predictions for next year as well with this same group. But before we do, a few honorable mentions. James, I'm going to ask you for the quick summary of some of the industry consolidation and changes. Before I ask you to do that, I just want to call out one in particular, which was a decision by Amazon that I'm going to come out and just say that I really disagree with the decision to deprecate the Wondery brand. Hernan, who is with us here, was the founder of Wondery, is the founder of Wondery, and they chose to not use the brand as it had been used for, I believe, more than a decade or close to a decade. And I really say, brand, I don't mean that word lightly. I mean in terms of not just the amazing packaging that was very aspirational and I felt leveled up what it meant to be in the podcasting industry. Wondery was, the gold standard for premium content. It was a fabulous business model under Hernan's leadership. And that's not to say anything disparaging of anything that happened since. Amazon's a big company. They got to do what they got to do. But I just think that what that represents today in our minds and for this industry is significant. And I would say, I'm just going to call it out as one of the changes that happened this year that I wish had not happened. Although I do believe at some point somebody will get wise and the Wondery brand will rise again in its consumer-facing application. So,
yeah, indeed. I mean, we did see an awful lot of change this year, an awful lot of closures and of belt tightening, certainly. I mean, we've also seen some pretty good news, Odyssey managing to get out of bankruptcy, iHeart managing to at least get rid of some of their debt, which is useful as well. Although, there's been all kinds of stuff going on at Spotify as well. So, really, I think we're seeing probably this is the bit of the bubble that happened between 2020 and 2023 still actually deflating a little bit in terms of that. But interesting, again, just to point out that most of these big cuts were in the US and weren't happening in other parts of the world as well.
And I should chime in that the Wondery brand is still very much alive. If you're a consumer, the average consumer doesn't know that there was any change. If you look at the shows that were under the Wondery brand, they're still published with the From Wondery at the beginning. So it was
that's
more
a good point.
corporate reorganization, and obviously we resulting in an unfortunate number of job cuts. But it was more a reorganization than a change in the brand.
And indeed, Wondery is one of the nominations for the Golden Globes. So, in terms of armchair experts, so I think that's going to again give an awful lot of spotlight to the Wondery brand, alongside SiriusXM, which has got 3 of the 6, which is astonishing, as well as NPR and the Ringer. So hopefully good news for Wondery as we move forward as a consumer brand, certainly.
And one nomination for Dying for Sex, the show based on a Wondery podcast on the television adaptation.
And you're right. I probably am looking at that a little narrowly, just because we're looking at it from who do we buy the ads from. But yes, with consumers, certainly there may not be that perception, and that's a good thing. I'm just nostalgic for when that had Hernan on it. I'll just leave it there. Okay, Neil, take us to another topic.
Okay, this will be quick. We had the podcast election 1.0 occurred in 2024 with Trump going on Rogan and all the views he captured. A lot of the learnings from that came out in 2025, and we published our own learnings about the podcast election. We have the podcast election 2.0 with the New York City mayor election and Zohran Mamdani really using podcasts to reach viewers on a very grassroots basis. So looking forward, next year, 2026, is an election year. Do not expect that podcasts will shrink any from what they've done in terms of being a major factor in the election. It's shown that people that use the medium can benefit from it and have benefited from it in winning their seats that they were going for.
And apropos of that, I think you're going to see a little more political advertising in podcasts than it did in the last election, because typically political ad buyers are a little behind the curve in the overall consumption trends, but everybody saw what happened in last year. So that's one trend that I predict, which we can say for the next episode.
So on that, I am curious if anybody knows it. Can you endorse candidates? Can you do paid endorsements in ad reads for political ads? Does anybody know?
There needs to be some. There's probably some FEC rule that governs exactly that. That's a good point. And maybe you wouldn't call it endorsement, but that's actually a good point to investigate.
I just wonder. I was talking to somebody about
Joe Rogan did.
He didn't endorse Trump.
Well, but if he did it as a live read,
Yes.
that would be funny. I don't know that.
Yeah.
I don't know that it works that way.
He didn't do it as an endorsement read.
Yeah, I mean, as politicians want to tap into the creator economy, But I think, look, I think what this definitely. Here's what I imagine the way it'll work. You'll see ad buys, and then lo and behold, candidates will start showing up on those shows who do the ad buys, right? Because I think that we knew a year ago, this doesn't have to be a new prediction, but we knew a year ago that this was a major thing in influencing the presidential election in the U.S. But I think we saw that it's also part of a proactive and healthy campaign plan now that you're going to see everybody on all sides continuing to support. And I'm sure there will be ad dollars. It's just I'm curious to see what form they take. Okay, maybe we can cram in one more before we wrap this episode. So Kyle, want to bring us home on AI?
I mean, it's happening. AI, we are using it for pre-produced ads. We're seeing basically it's status quo now as far as creative for pre-produced stuff. And I was talking before, it's opening the door for transcreation internationally, and people are putting their content into languages that they previously were unable to do it. And so now it really is coming down to, like, where do we draw the line? What are we able to do? What kind of acknowledgement do we need to put in these ads when we're using AI? But I think we're going to see it become more ubiquitous in 2026, obviously.
Yeah, well, and what people may not know is that this is a whole AI episode. None of us were actually even here to do this. So AI
But
Hernan, do you want to chime in
but
on this?
I think your point is that we'll see more of it, but we won't necessarily know that it is happening. I've seen
Yep.
now two studies, one about songs and one about ads, where consumers cannot tell the difference whether something was done by AI or not. But once you tell them that it was done with AI, they think less positively about it. So what can you expect? People are going to use AI and not tell anybody because how can you really separate how much AI are you using into this? It's going to be difficult for somebody to say this was 100% human made. Some people will try. I mean, I've seen already some credits in movies saying this is 100% human made. But there's going to be a point in which you cannot avoid using AI at some point in your process.
I was saying iHeart's already they're doubling down on 100% human. Like we put that
On the radio stations, yeah.
Yep.
One thing I want to say is
Right.
AI is where we are today, but synthetic voices go back all the way to the 1930s. So it's not
That's
new
true.
technology to have synthetic voices that are used. We now have just better capabilities to do it with AI.
And there's a big difference, isn't there, between a radio DJ who you're spending 4 hours a day with being AI, which some radio broadcasters have done, and it sounds as if iHeart has said that they're not going to do, and things like, travel news. So there's a radio group in the UK who is doing 100 different travel bulletins on one of their radio stations, specifically targeted for each transmitter. And you can only do that with AI, and they sound great. They sound as if they're humans, and it's a great experience. So I think turning around and saying we're only going to use humans on our station is probably not such a great move, to be honest.
Yeah, and we'll see how long that ads or lasts when some of the ads they're running were AI generated, right? But I think our position at the agency is like keep the endorsements or host read ads authentic, and keep your content disclaimed. And ultimately, though, I think there has to be some place for it, and just economies of scale. I don't know that I particularly care if somebody's reading a promo code and it's an AI or a human that's reading it. But just don't let the listener be misled, because they're not going to like that. It might be fine when there's no trust involved in what's being communicated. And with that, going from video to AI, we have really covered the gamut of 2025. We can officially conclude this year and say that we've at least done our best to spew our opinions about it. And I thank you all for joining this section, and looking forward to continuing the conversation as we look ahead to 2026. Thank you all for joining. What a fabulous group of friends coming to share all of their thoughts with us. I want to thank you for taking time out of your life to be part of this conversation and joining the Media Roundtable. You may not know this, but this podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road. We want you to succeed in this medium that is all about creators and all about conversation, whether it runs through a video or an audio feed. And it's really for marketers at the end of the day. And I want to just remind everyone that we have the power to advance voices that don't just entertain, but edify, and to build bridges across differences through fair-minded discussion. That's what we love about this medium. If you're a marketer and you're interested in aligning your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, I suggest you reach out to Oxford Road. Just go to oxfordroad.com. You can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter while you're there. It's called The Influencer, and it is free, just like Pod News is free or Podcast Business Journal. Everything that you really need in this world is free, except the advertising. And we'd love to hear from you. If you have feedback, email us, info@mediaroundtable.com. Special thanks to producer Haley, Bianca, Kyle, Ezra, Rocio, Neil, the team at Podcast One, and to you for listening or watching. As always, influence responsibly.